Hello and welcome back to Data News of the Week. You know how this goes by now. This is the video where throughout the week, when there's been little blips and blobs of news floating around that involve data and networking and more, I take all of them and put them into one big video on their own. And starting off, we want to return to something from last week's News of the Week, the Samsung 990 Pro. We talked about some early release on the PCI SIG pages that were sort of suggesting that it was going to be a PCIe Gen 5 SSD. However, within the last few days, we have seen official release announcements and information and data sheets arriving from Samsung that the 990 Pro is indeed a PCIe 4 SSD, serving as an upgrade on the existing 980 Pro there. And we've done a full article. Again, we've updated the old one as well, but loads of information on this new SSD. Everything breaking down into the individual performance of the available capacities, with 1 and 2 TB arriving now, and in 2023, a 4 TB model. Performance benchmark there of sequential read up to 7,450 megabytes per second, making it one of the fastest, potentially the fastest SSD in the PCIe Gen 4 generation there. But what's really intriguing is that write performance, 6,900 megabytes per second, making it faster than the WD Black that was revealed recently, the SN850X, and with IOPS there reported at 1.2 million and 1.4 million IOPS there, maximum transfer there. And again, if you look at write IOPS hitting 1.5 million there as well. So again, lovely numbers all the way through, and there is a heatsink and non-heatsink version available as well. I mentioned that the pages are live. There's the press release, which you've seen copied and pasted a lot online, it has to be said, and there are details there. But one thing we still don't know is, one, the controller on board, because Samsung have, much like WD as well, incredibly secretive about their controllers, and it is an in-house controller, as you can see. Same goes with the NAND. There was talk of a potential 200-layer NAND around about a week ago in a news report out from Samsung, and kind of they're competing with some of the brands out there in terms of NAND production there. So I don't know if this is going to benefit from that, but it must be quite a high layer 3D TLC NAND count that's using their Samsung in-house 3-bit VNAND. But again, what we're seeing there in terms of specifications are pretty good. Unsurprisingly though, and I say unsurprising in a slightly dour way, it doesn't feature increased durability compared with that of the 980 Pro. It still puts 0.3 drive writes per day, or 6 1200 and 2400 terabytes written. And again, it has already started listing on their individual sales pages there. You can't buy it yet. There's just information about them. Actually, if you try and buy them right now, I can show you right now. Open it up, go for UK. It has started being listed in places. It's just simply not really available yet, but it should be coming very, very soon, and hopefully you'll see a review here on the channel in due course there. But again, do go through the individual pages to find out more about them. And again, the heatsink version is taking advantage of a brand new kind of gamer-inspired heatsink. And if you do want to see this on some PS5 testing, do let me know. I almost certainly will, but it'd be good to know. But apart from that, great. We know what the 990 Pro is finally. Next up, bit of a rubbish one. A number of you, I'm sure, have heard about this. Plex got hacked, and they got hacked big. Their databases were infiltrated and data was obtained. It wasn't a ransomware attack where the data was wrapped up, but someone got in there and the organization made away with quite a lot of information on users. Now, again, they're saying it's up to 15 million users have been hit. Now, the exact figure has kind of been bandied back and forth online, with Plex not really confirming completely the actual number. They say it is a subset of users there, but when you think about the scale of Plex, the number of users affected is still going to be pretty big, and definitely in the millions. Whether it does hit, as they are suggesting that it belonged to at least half of the 30 million users, how much Plex is confirmed on that still needs to be ascertained. But the information that has been obtained is emails, usernames, and encrypted passwords. So frankly, the worst of the worst. Now, many of you may be thinking, so they know I've got Robocop 1, 2, and 3 on my server. Who cares? Well, don't overlook how much access to your server you have given Plex, whether it's a NAS, a Raspberry Pi, an NVIDIA Shield, or whatever. And the idea that your Plex media server account can be remote accessed likely means that that same account can access your server architecture, at least the amounts that Plex has been given permission to. Now, lots of users online immediately started reporting that in that breach, that they were the ones that weren't able to access their systems due to the passwords being changed there. On top of that, again, emails were being sent out. Our user account that we use for our Plex videos here on the channel, that throwaway account, got information sent over to us with Plex saying that we should enable verification there, two-step, as well as enabling password. But remember, whether you have them enabled or not, they are still going to send you this email if it looks like you are one of the ones affected. But again, how true that is or whether it's been sent to all users is yet to be verified. But again, they are fully kind of behind this idea of you should change your password immediately. Now, culpability is something to talk about here, but again, it's a little early at the moment to see just what Plex did wrong and what the entry point for this was. But this is still pretty bad when it comes down to it, because this is, you know, quite the fact that people are hit by this when they are, unlike Netflix or Prime, where the server and the information is all the way over there, and if it gets hacked, they can stop you gaining access, but you can try to use your own personal credentials to verify yourself and get access back. This is still talking about your server, your data, and the thing that you have made remotely accessible suddenly having a hole in it. So again, if you are watching this and you've not changed your password, I know it's annoying. You might have relatives that are using it and you have to go round there and set up their TV and they don't really know how these things work. Change your password. Change their password. It's worth it. You are still talking about an access point to your data and all the other data that may be on your machine. Next up, we can talk about the slightly lighter subject of semiconductors and the potential for things to get better. For those that aren't aware of all of the components that are becoming increasingly hard to come by in terms of the point of manufacture, things like we talked about before with the Russia-Ukraine conflict and how it's affected neon production. But when it comes to semiconductor production, it has to be said that the East still makes up the lion's share of production of this incredibly important component. But in the last week to 10 days, we've seen loads of interesting news stories talking about big SSD and particularly NAND production companies, as well as just atypical semiconductor production, with a lot of investment going in right now and new sites being opened up there. So Samsung were revealing their 15 billion chip research center to kind of upscale a lot of that production. They're still in the East, it has to be said, but then on top of that, we have got a lot of stuff going on with Indian semiconductor production increasing as well as the order signed by President Biden recently in terms of approving a huge development there of a new production facility there in the US. And again, we're seeing more and more kind of bolstering and partnership of big companies like the likes of Intel that are partnering with other companies such as this, and investment going into wider spread semiconduction across the world all the way. And again, new legislation and more laws are being passed through to enable the production of certain of these raw materials that are used in semiconductor creation worldwide, being enabled and made a lot deal easier, in the hopes that this graph will not look so bad in 2 years' time. And again, there was one that really stood out amongst the others, and that to do with Intel embarking on their new Ohio site production facility for semiconductor production. Man, that is hard to say. While at the same time, their stock has been taking an absolute kicking recently due to the likes of hardware shortages and, of course, trade wars and disputes all the way around the world there. But still, hopefully, in a couple of years, some of this will start bearing fruit and semiconductors will hopefully see a little bit more availability. But again, fingers crossed, who knows. And finally, let's talk about a couple of little new release storage bits that came up during the week. The first one is this from the Sandisk range. For those that aren't aware, the G drive has an enterprise class model there, and it's now started rolling in with their 22 TB drives. The smart money would suggest that it is an HC drive that's in there. The data center class drive is going to be inside that as part of the Ultrastar series. And again, availability in up to 22 TB. It's a USB 3.2 Gen 2 drive. So again, even though that's great to hear, bear in mind as it is a hard drive, this drive maxes out at around 250 to 280 megabytes per second performance there. So although you do have that connection over USB-C that is going to allow a tremendous amount of accessible bandwidth, bear in mind that this drive and that, particularly the hard drive inside, is not going to exceed that number there. And again, it's available to buy right now with the 2TB being £643. Currently in the UK, I will say that those of you that are looking at this and thinking of shucking out the drive, unless 22TB drives are in scarcity, you're not going to make much money, because 22TB, particularly if it is an Ultrastar inside, that's about the going rate. If you don't include the external chassis, you're not going to make anything from shucking that, at least buy a drive. In the US, $649, but again, it's not available to buy anywhere at the moment. And carrying on the subject of new products, we can talk a little bit about SSDs. We're seeing more PCIe Gen 5 SSDs start to be talked about. Two that stood out this week is the Aurus 10,000 or the 10K, and that is a 10,000 megabytes per second read and write speed SSD that's arriving from Gigabyte there. So think about their previous generation. And again, reasonable enough drive there. We have seen some Gen 5 SSDs crack 12 and 13 gigabytes. So again, this seems a little bit behind that, but maybe this is going to be their early first release. Do stay tuned for hopefully October is when we're going to start reviewing Gen 5 SSDs here on NAS Compares, as well as returning to an SSD that we've talked about on the channel before, the Echo Gen 5 from Fadu, when we originally talked about it, and that was back in, let's have a look there, that was back in November of 2021 we first talked about this drive. Back on that video, we talked a lot about it being very early doors. They were talking about what it could do, not really much going on about capacities, but now we're seeing way more information arrive with it, with a full data sheet talking about the available capacities on the 2280 length SSD and more, as well as some of those performance levels, with sequential read being reported at 14,600 there, and the IOPS there doing an exceptional job as well, unquestioningly at 2.5 million. So again, good capacities, good sizes, depending on obviously the format you go for. It's not just M2, but of course NVMe SSDs are the ones that we're really focused on for this video. And there's a great write-up here on Blocks and Files where they go into a lot more detail about the heatsink enabled version, as well as some of the other variants of Fadu's new Echo SSD. So I recommend you check that out. But this has been Data News of the Week. I hope you enjoyed it. Over here in the UK, it is a 3-day bank holiday weekend, so put the sausages on the barbecue and enjoy. But otherwise, stay tuned for next week. We'll be looking a lot more at this. Looks a bit understated, but this is the QNAP TS453E, a very intriguing NAS. And it's going to be a long review, I'll warn you, but trust me, this does deserve your attention, because it is really changing what QNAP's portfolio is going to be, and particularly in terms of desktop 4-bays, with this system here changing what you expect at that price point of that $500 or so mark. And I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. It's not perfect, and the things that annoy me really annoy me, but there aren't many of them. But do stay tuned for that review. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next time.